being and construction of meaning during the COVID-19 pandemic in corporate professionals. So let us warmly welcome Dr. Elizabeth.
Hi, can you see my slide, please? Is it is my slide visible?
Ma'am, we can still see your screen actually. PPT is not visible still.
Yeah, is it visible now? Just tell me, let me know. I've opened it. I'll just put it on slideshow. Um, is it visible now?
Not still, ma'am. We can see your screen, but not the PPT.
Uh, okay, I think, yeah. Is it visible now? I'll just start. Is it
No,
visible?
ma'am. Actually, I can't see the PPT.
All right. I've actually shared the PowerPoint with you as well. Is it possible for you to share it from your end? I'll just
Yes,
try.
ma'am. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. Till that you try, I'll share the screen till that.
Um, One sec. So sorry for the inconvenience. Um, I'll just exit the screen sharing. Yeah, I'll just try once more. Mm, Yeah. All right.
Yes, ma'am. So you can see.
Yeah. It,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So sorry for the inconvenience. Last time also this happened.
No problem, ma'am. You can continue.
Yeah. So thank you so much for the warm welcome. So I would like to present my work. So my work has always been around well-being and how we make sense of our experience, especially during a crisis. So this is part of my research project, which I conducted during the pandemic. So it looked into the lived experience of well being and construction of meaning during the COVID 19 pandemic in corporate professionals. And what I did, how I conducted the study was using a phenomenological inquiry. So, phenomenological study primarily explores and captures the lived experience of the participants and the phenomenon which defined their lives during a particular period of time. So, that's what I've been looking into. So, as far as the context of the study is concerned, can you move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So, yeah, the next one. As far as the context of the study is concerned, we're looking at corporate professionals because for decades, extensive studies have been conducted, which shows how the stress, the work culture, the expectations to meet both family expectations and professional expectations, the kind of mental health issues and challenges and the physical challenges that professionals have been facing has been extremely, it's been excessive, that decades of research has been conducted. And as we're all familiar with, most of the organizations, they shell out billions in the name of mental health develop well-being of their professionals, and still yet we are in a phase where the stress and the way professionals cope with challenges and the kind of support systems that we have for them, it has not improved. So, COVID-19 pandemic and the study conducted during it has been an attempt actually to understand where we're going wrong, and also in order to understand from the perspective of the stakeholders who are nothing, who are professionals themselves, and to understand what kind of support do they actually need. So, which is why an in-depth qualitative study has been conducted in this regard. So, before I start off, another important reason for this or the relevance of this study is that we might face various kinds of crises in the future. So, how equipped are we, and the kind of challenges that can come about while taking care of employees is something we need to be prepared now. So, which is why the study also becomes extremely relevant. Now, coming to the review that has been done, the study, the kind of challenges that has been that the professionals or even people in general have been facing during the pandemic has been multiple layered actually. So right from health emergency to coping with a different way of living to drastically cutting down on expenses, has been a wide range of issues that have been impacting the lives of common man. And demands from the global market, it transformed the way professionals even look to the job market. And this is a problem that stayed on with us. With the advent of AI, we know how the entire job landscape itself had gone for a huge change. So the pandemic actually transformed the way of living in many households itself. So they were all exploring ways to live around the pandemic. And what happened was some of the changes that were made also started living with them after the pandemic. So for most of us, if you look at it, there's been so many things that changed for us during the pandemic, which would have also stayed with us. So here we're also looking at a time, we're looking at a professional landscape where a lot of things has accelerated with the advent of AI. So AI actually brought about a lot of changes during the pandemic, which would have stretched on if this had not been a scenario for us. So we're looking at how the professionals navigated through this and how it shaped their lived experience of well-being and how it helped them make sense of their experiences, and in turn how did it shape their reality. This is what we're looking at. So, the pandemic, as I discussed, shaped every aspect of their lives. And can you move on to the next slide, please? Can you move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So here, the specific themes that we're looking at, it looks at how the professionals restructured the way of life during the pandemic. So a qualitative study which explored the live experience is what we've looked at. So here, the qualitative data that I obtained with my research, it was analyzed using Colizzi's restrictive phenomenological approach, which is one of the core phenomenological analysis that's done in a pure phenomenological study. And it also led to the emergence of four emergent themes. The four emergent themes it reflects that I obtained, it reflects the construction of meaning and reauthoring of the lives of professionals as they navigated through their professional and marital lives during the pandemic, while they experienced drastic transitions in their way of life during the pandemic. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So here, the as I already mentioned, various studies have been conducted which has looked at the stress and strain experienced by professionals. However, in this particular study, it's a phenomenological inquiry. We've approached it using a transcendental phenomenological approach. So, what the study explores or captures is a lived everyday experience of well being in the professionals and the way they construct meaning out of their experiences. So, here using this method, we've been able to capture the different layers that make up their lived everyday experience, thus making the data that we obtained extremely rich and more holistic. And to understand a concept like well being and how you make sense of your experience, a study which can actually capture the different layers becomes very important, because well-being, as we all know, is a very non-linear concept. It's not very linear or straightforward. The way it shapes an individual's life is multi-layered. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So, in this study, I've taken professionals working in three specific sectors, which is the banking, telecom, and IT sectors. So, the reason for taking these professionals in these three sectors is because the studies conducted both prior to the pandemic as well as during the pandemic clearly shows how the long work hours, excessive deadlines, demanding customers, changing nature of job opportunities, lack of flexibility, and the consequent effect on the physical and mental health of professionals have been studied extensively. So this already shows that these are the three sectors which has been drastically impacted by the kind of stress and strain the industries put on the organizations as well as on its employees. Therefore, during a challenging situation like the pandemic, I wanted to explore how the professionals in these three specific sectors, how they navigated through these challenges. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So, the method, the research design of the study is a transcendental phenomenological study where we look at first aspect was to identify the phenomenon which defined the lives of the professionals and consequently then look at and analyze the data using a Colizzi's descriptive phenomenological method which helped to capture and come up or explore, and it also led us to four emergent themes here. So in a transcendental study, the lived experiences and the essence of those experiences are the two core concepts which helps us capture what they actually experience. So yes, that is the overall method that's been used. Can you move on to the next one, please? So the research participants, as I already mentioned, it's 20 Indian married corporate professionals employed in India, UAE, and US have been taken in. So the participant selection parameters are so professionals who've been employed in an organization for more than 2 years and specifically in IT, banking, and telecom sectors and within the age range of 30 to 50 have been taken in for the study. And the criterion based on which they were excluded were professionals who've joined an organization as trainee, which is they would be just 1 year old in the organization or in this field, and those diagnosed with prior mental health disorders and those who've experienced traumatic life events have been excluded. So specifically, they've been excluded because those experiencing mental health problems and with traumatic life experiences, it would it would have been very difficult for them to narrate the experience at this point because since I've been using a phenomenological inquiry, my mode of data collection has been in depth qualitative interviews where you go into every aspect of your emotion, your experience. If so, I was very particular, my participants should not and no part of their life should get upset or disturbed because of this study. So, which is why I refrain from taking those who are diagnosed with mental health disorders and those who've recently experienced traumatic life events because we've already navigating through a very stressful period and the study was conducted and the interviews were conducted during the pandemic which itself was a very sensitive period for most of us. Yes. May I move? Can you move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So the sampling method used here was purposive sampling. So purposive sampling is used when you have a predetermined criterion for selection criterion for choosing your stud participants. So here we already had a clear-cut idea which are the sectors from which the professionals will be chosen. And a purposive sampling sizes are normally determined by the data itself. So when you reach a point in your data collection where new data does not add to more inputs on the research questions that you're asking, that is where you stop your data collection. So I reached data saturation point after my 15th interview. However, I conducted 5 more interviews to ensure that I had reached the correct data saturation point. May I move on to the next slide, please? So, primarily, the data collection procedure was in-depth qualitative interviews, which ranged from an average of 40 minutes to 1.5 hours per interviewee. And along with it, a socio-demographic form was given in order to collect a few additional information which would give an insight into an or give a much more holistic picture about the participants and their lives. Next slide, please. Yeah, you can go on to the next slide. So I'll give you a brief about the data analysis procedure, which is a Colicey's descriptive phenomenological method. So you start with getting familiar with all the transcribed interviews from the which we've collected, then extracting the significant statements from the transcript. And these were phrases that were directly connected to the phenomenon that was identified. So, in this case, the phenomenon that were identified was a lived experience of well being in professionals. So, the meanings were formulated from the significant statement. So, during this process, meanings formulated which were interconnected were categorized together to form cluster themes. The interconnected cluster themes were grouped to form emergent themes. The cluster themes and emergent themes were exhaustively described. The participants were also asked to verify the themes that emerged and the phenomenon identified aligned with their lived experience. And this procedure is called, or process is called, member check. Can you move on to the next slide, please? All right, so we'll move on to the results and discussion section. So the first theme was I felt pushed. Yeah, you can move on to the next slide. Yes, the first theme. First thing, yeah. I felt pushed to the brink at work. So the context in which I interviewed the professionals was, so I interviewed them during after the first year. When we were done with the first year, we were all the whole world was moving into the second year. We were done with the first year. We've lived through the first year of the pandemic. That is when I interviewed the professionals. So they, with the questions, with the interaction, they started off with a context. So when the whole pandemic started, the world was in a very scared and um, cautious situation where there were a lot of financial crunches, a lot of uncertainties experienced across the globe. And as a direct result, a lot of organizations across the globe decided to come up with stringent policies or changes that directly affected the well-being of the professionals. So a lot of them were in a state where they've been in the organization for years, where they already proved their worth in the organization. However, this was a time where the drastic and sudden policy changes, along with their own insecurities about their future, it led them to a position where they had to prove their worth to the organization again because there were unexpected firings, cutting down, pay cuts. All these became the lived reality around this time. And this was a time when they had to prove their worth again. They were stretching themselves beyond their limits. And since they were all working remotely, organizations also had a lot of expectation. Okay, they're not going anywhere. They're supposed to work around the clock. So some of the excerpts from the interviews has been given here. So one of my participants talks about how I had a team of 14 and all of them got sacked. So one day you walk into or you have a meeting in your with your team and none of them are there. It's a nightmare because you don't know what to expect and you have a family to take care of. And this was a time where the work was also spilling into their personal lives in a lot of ways. And so one of my participants also says, I was attending meetings all the time. It was quite exhausting. So they reached a stage where they were being pushed to the brink. They don't know how to make sense of their reality. So the initial 4 to 5 months of the pandemic, they were just going with the crunch. They were just living through it. They were just navigating through multiple things. And it reached a stage where they just felt they were pushed to that brink where they could not go on anymore. This is how, and the way they made sense of the reality was it was very survival at this point. I had to do all these things to survive. I had to do this so we could survive in a world that is now filled or engulfed in crisis. That was the way they made sense of the reality initially. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So, what happened to a lot of them? This is what they were saying. So, 5, 6 months they were living like this. After a point, it reached a stage where they realized if that was also the time most of us got to know that the pandemic is not going to go anywhere. It's going to be around for some more time. So, a lot of the professionals realized if you want to live, you can't live like this for the rest of your life or for 1, 2, how many ever years. So that is when despite the fact that there were a lot of changes in the job market. They didn't even know, okay, where is this heading career wise or any way, possible health wise, financially, in every sphere there was too much of uncertainty. What a lot of them decided was, this is going to go on, the pandemic is not going to go anywhere soon, but we have to figure out how to navigate through this. So this was a turning point in the way they experience their well-being. For most of them, they regained control over their work life. They also, it was a shift in the mindset itself, where they became more strong and positive. So as professionals, I feel, this is another participants excerpt, as professionals I feel we should be equipped fully to handle the changes. It made me put in a lot of effort. So the kind of attitude is what helped them sustain themselves during this drastic change. So, on stressful days, I have to plan a different strategy. My motto is to keep exploring ways to find a solution to the problem. So, this mindset helped them to literally start living their lives. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So now, as I mentioned in the first theme, along with the professional stress, since they were working from home all the time, the stress spilled over to the marital life. So a lot of them, was a time where there was a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of marital discord that came up initially. However, what most of my participants also said was, this is a time when they already had a strong bond. So they realized that they had to navigate through it and live happily. They had to work as a team. This is what they said about their families. And this is a time where a lot of them felt a lot of emotional comfort and safety from their family. When everything was bleak and uncertain, the moment they started bringing in the flexibility in how they navigated through things, and they started working as a team, there was a lot of rhythm and togetherness that they experienced. I didn't cope, this is one of the participants' excerpts. I didn't cope well emotionally. My husband was very supportive here. He knew I needed a shoulder to cry on. So a lot of men were stepping up, a lot of women were stepping up. So it was not a lot about being so all of us across different cultures look at roles from very gendered lens, especially from the culture that I'm coming from, which is a very collectivist culture. Everything is very gendered normally, especially when it comes to roles. But this was a time where households across the world, Indian households, there were a lot of transition on a personal level, where the whole idea of a family unit functioning as a team became very relevant. You started relooking at the prescribed gender roles. You started stepping in when the other person needed you. So that was how the strengthened bond as a couple grew in a lot of cases, where they also experienced a lot of growth and oneness in their marital lives. This was a beautiful shift a lot of people spoke about. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So this is a very unique theme that a lot of them credited to the pandemic, actually. So since I interviewed them after 1 year into the pandemic, it I got a picture about their journey through that 1 year. So a lot of them, by the end of a year, they had gone through a lot in their personal front, professional front. That's also the time they started introspecting and reflecting on their lives. So pandemic. So prior to this, most of them were going to office, had hectic schedules. They never connected with themselves. So this was a time, also because of the nature of the pandemic and the kind of challenges that were thrown at most of us. After settling into the professional space, personal space, a lot of them also took out the time to introspect. They started focusing on what they really wanted and who are they as human beings. So, one of my participants beautifully put it out there: I'm getting the time to reflect on myself. I might not change that much, but I know what I am now. It's a very powerful thought, because it's not about constantly changing oneself. It's about accepting who you are and working with what you've got. So, this realistic way of looking at the world was a very liberating feeling for a lot of them, and it harmonized what how they felt about themselves, and it brought in a lot of inner harmony. So another participant spoke about, I started writing. I wrote a poem about my problems that helped me to feel at peace with how I felt. It's a beautiful way of putting how somebody navigates through a situation, how they explore it, and how they just live with it happily. So this is I feel a very realistic way of living with the situation, especially during a crisis stricken time like the ones we all navigated through. So, can you move on to the next slide, please? So now we're coming to the discussion of the four themes that I discussed. So I felt pushed to the brink, which is the first theme. It captures the significant obstacles encountered by professionals throughout the pandemic, which resulted in the emotions of powerlessness, annoyance, discontent, as we had already discussed. Studies also show how the stress and pressure in corporate spaces, it leads to a lot of burnout trains in them, as well as causes excessive pressure and stress. So the experience that was captured in this theme, it captures the way in which they experience their well-being while going through a very rough phase in their professional lives. Next slide, please. So the second one, taking charge of work life despite the chaos, it brings out a pattern of fortitude and adjustment. So participants narrated their encounters with while they reclaimed the authority or they basically reauthored their own lives. And this is such a powerful moment for most of them because when you learn to take life the way you want it to, when you steer the wheel, it's when you steer, when you have control over your life, it's a very different feeling. So the well-being and quality of life here was enhanced, and there was a lot of calmness and happiness that it brought into their lives. Next slide, please. So the third theme, it explores a way in which the professionals adopt adaptive ways to overcome challenges with their partners. It focused on a feeling of being safe and enjoying the growth and oneness. The strong, beautiful bond is what helped them to work as a team. It helped them navigate through a lot. Uh, where without breaking down, without going through any nervous breakdown or emotional breakdown, they were able to hold the space for each other and for their families. It was a beautiful feeling that they were able to reflect on. This is how they constructed the meaning around their lives, and this shaped their reality at that point. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So the fourth one, it captures how the professionals felt so connected with themselves once they felt settled into their professional and marital lives. This was very crucial to their well-being. And since pandemic at a later stage offered time and space for inner reflection, it's a feeling that they experienced. So the curiosity to explore beyond work in everyday lives was tied to a higher purpose in life and higher self-acceptance, according to the studies also conducted by Randy and Ellen Ravina Ripoli during the pandemic. So this theme actually captures the experience of well-being once they felt settled in and happy in their professional marital space. And also, very importantly, it helped them explore their inner selves and help them feel happier and satisfied with their lives. Yeah. Can you move on to the next one? Yeah, so the study also has a few limitations. So one of the major limitation is since a qualitative study, we also had could only take a few individuals, that's 20 participants, which definitely made it difficult to generalize the results of the study. And it was also limited to the three sectors, so which definitely limits its ability to generalize. However, the whole point of a qualitative study is to capture the unique experiences. Yes. Another major limitation was the time frame. So the professionals had a very hectic schedule during the pandemic. So this only allowed the researcher to interview them once for an average time of 1 hour. If there were more time available, multiple interviews with each of the participants would have definitely added to the richness of the data that I'd obtained. So, the study has been conducted during the pandemic. So, the restrictions of the pandemic and the time constraints also made me resort to a virtual medium for conducting the study, which definitely gave me a wider access to data across the globe. However, if it was physical interview, I would have been able to capture the nonverbal cues with much more precision, and that would have definitely widened and added more depth to the data obtained. And the age range of the participants here were from 30 to 50 years. So the wide age gap somewhere took away the consistency and uniformity in the data. So these are some of the limitations of the present study. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so the present study has explored the process of meaning making in corporate professionals and their lived experience of well being while they navigated through the uncertainties of the pandemic. So, future studies which could explore the cognitive thinking pattern in corporate professionals, which help them stay resilient, will be a very good direction to move around in, which can help in building resilience in employees and coming up with much more advanced intervention modules, which would help in resilience building and crisis management training programs, which will help us get more prepared to face any crisis in the future. Thank you so much. With this, we come to the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much for that um, insightful and engaging presentation. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Any questions, you can definitely reach out to me.
So, as there are no questions,